So, welcome back to the story series. The last chapter saw us address the underhanded invasion of the Aetherians, assimilated Iconians from another parallel timeline, whose modus operandi had been to filter Borg variations from alternate realities into others in order to create a crisis in which they could respond and be hailed as saviours, thus absorbing those they helped into their concordium. However, they bit off more than they could chew with the Chimerans, from a reality where the Borg were driven to insanity and biomechanical horror. We've managed to cut off access to our reality for the time being from the Chimeran threat, and the Aetherians' apparent leader? Thasseen Fei is in our custody. Since then, they've lost their flagship, which is now also sealed in the Chimeran universe. But make no mistake, they are still out there, and in the interim, over the past few weeks of quiet, some events have unfolded behind the scenes. As a refresher, the Iconian War only came to an end when we returned the World Heart, their repository of knowledge and the core of Iconian culture, to Chimeran. Chimeran had ever been the one to approach a gentler, if still tyrannical, approach to the war, but was amiable to a ceasefire and the end of hostilities when the core was restored to them. After it was revealed that the Aetherians were a combination of Iconian and Borg, through a process they had adopted called fusion, it was not long before the Iconians of our universe, those same individuals who had brought the galaxy to the edge of ruin, wanted to at least meet these potential cousins from another universe, no matter how different they may have become. As mentioned, we have captured Thasseen Fei, or Fei as her Iconian name was, but she's proven to be unwilling to divulge too much about the history of the Aetherians and the structure of their collective, even when a common threat in the Chimerans had presented itself, another wild card we still know precious little about. But now, Chimeran, leader of the Iconian remnants, has arrived, accepting the Khitomer Alliance invitation to meet with our prisoner, the supposed head of the Aetherian Concordium. After being escorted through the maximum security prison, the captain of the Enterprise F, Vakel Shon, met with Captain Kargren of the Khitomer to act as escorts. They spent some time reminiscing about the Klingon Federation War, and how glad each was that it was behind them before boarding the station. There was a brief threat of an incident when Chimeran almost saw the deposed Empress Sela, also a prisoner here, and the one responsible for stealing the World Heart to begin with, but Sela had the good sense to hide from view and stay there. Upon being confronted with Chimeran, her physiology more energy construct than biological but still recognisably Iconian, Fei became far more animate, referring to her as LeMay? And it's noted that since her removal from the Concordium, Fei has been looking ever more Iconian, but also becoming more erratic. Chimeran states that she is not this LeMay, but suggests that perhaps they are the Aetherian universe's counterpart. Fei goes on to explain that LeMay was a traitor who fled when the Borg Collective came for them, which incited her anger. An outburst of unintended power leads Chimeran to state that Fei is not ready to return to the Iconian Whole, citing concerns that the Aetherians' corruption and drive to assimilate is still present. But the two are left alone to converse. After all, should Chimeran actually wish to break the Aetherian out of a Federation jail, there's probably not much we could do to stop it. They're just too powerful. The conversation continues, but we're not privy to it, and while that exchange is happening, the two captains have a chance meeting with an undisclosed individual, a man in his early 50s with greying hair who wishes to discuss a matter of time with them. While we are also not privy to his name, it seems to be Amar Noonien Singh, a descendant of Khan who was imprisoned for dabbling in banned genetic augmentation. And this ties into a new event, or perhaps an old one. Across the galaxy, on a dead world, a mighty construct hums to life and peers through time. The Guardian of Forever is exploring the recent past and has noticed something is changing. Back in 2409, over 2 years ago in the timeline of the Star Trek Online story series, President Okeg of the Federation and the then Chancellor Jimpok of the Klingon Empire are discussing a meeting with their respective staffs in preparation of a ceasefire. It is 5 years into the Klingon Federation War, the time in which our character, Mark Hale, found himself emerging into after being displaced from the past, and it was the first story arc of Star Trek Online. The Empire is dealing with rebellious Gorn, the war with the Federation, and their continual quest to hunt down and expose Species 8472 infiltrators in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. On the Federation side of things, their view is that the Klingon Empire will not pursue peace, but there are parties on both sides weighing in on the merits of continuing the conflict or seeking a peace accord. Among many of the voices raised in opposition on the Klingon side, however, is Ambassador Bavat. Bavat. He is the man who would ultimately utilise a planet killer, the location provided to him by the Nakul. However, we have halted these attempts in the Imaga system in episode 13 of our story. His fate after the war was unclear, with many assuming him dead, but it looks like he may have survived. His concerns, however, are that the Federation will ultimately consume the Klingon Empire, and they will lose their sovereignty and culture to the perceived homogenization of the UFP. However, Jimpok, for all that he would become down the line, at this time was pragmatic. He knew that the Federation had recently witnessed the Undine, Species 8472 infiltration, themselves, and that both sides were hurting from this war. He knew that calling an end to this conflict might even allow the Empire a chance to rearm, rebuild, and maybe strike again in the future, if needed. Bavat leaves the meeting with his own schemes in mind, as the Empire prepares to agree to hosting talks on Khitomer once more. However, we know from our timeline, our story, that these events were followed by an investigation into the destruction of Romulus, events that ultimately unearthed the Iconian Empire's involvement and more. This change is the disturbance that the Guardian of Forever has detected, it seems, and 2 is now taking matters into its own hands. In fact, there's also a bit of a meta-narrative going on here too. You see, many years ago in Star Trek Online's past, there was a whole storyline involving Miral Paris and the Kuvun Ma prophecy that no longer existed in the game. By the time I actually began this story series, it was removed from the campaign and no longer playable. I was unable to document it, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to make the story series in the first place, so that there'd always be a tale present even if stuff disappeared. But in celebration of the 60th anniversary of Star Trek and the 16th year of STO being live, this storyline has been completely reworked and added as a foundational chapter, one that seemingly plans to fold into a new tale. So, as we move into Chapter 13 of the Star Trek Online story series, the stage is set for a new tale, one being manipulated by the past and into an unclear future, a journey that I hope you'll join me for as we uncover the latest tales in the ongoing narrative of Star Trek Online. I'll see you next yesterday, and until then, I've been Rick, and goodbye.